When the things written above have been observed prudently, they make a new prince appear ancient, and immediately render him more secure and steady in his state than if he had grown old in it. For a new prince is observed much more in his actions than a hereditary one, and when they are recognized as virtuous, they take hold of men much more and obligate them much more than ancient blood. This chapter 24 condenses in a couple of sentences the lessons of Machiavelli's theory of conquest developed over the course of the previous 23 chapters. The acquisition of power, Machiavelli informs his reader in the very first chapter, occurs either by heredity or by conquest. Readers who may expect Machiavelli to explain under what conditions conquest is legitimate will be disappointed. Instead of working within the conventional humanist jurisprudence and its normative distinctions between legitimate and illegitimate government, Machiavelli focuses on the political mechanics, the criteria for success, the analysis of possible tactics and procedures, instruments and maneuvers. The desire to conquer, he adds in chapter 3, is a natural and ordinary thing. Conquest, in other words, derives from the dynamics of political power. It is not reducible to princely ambition. It is a structural element of a competitive political field. In The Prince, Machiavelli dissects conquest into two temporally and politically distinct problems: founding a state and maintaining it. A successful conquest, Machiavelli writes, consists not only in military victory, but in building and constructing the foundations for political authority. In other words, in creating a political form that can last and that can embody the conditions for the reproduction of effective domination. One of the symptoms of Machiavelli's evasion of the normative debates about conquest is his avoidance of the conventional juridical terminology of conquest, conquisto, or its lexical derivatives, conquistare, riconquistare, even though these terms are in use in the vernacular Italian at the time of his writing. Instead, he prefers the terms acquistare, to acquire, or, in a more military valence, vincere, with its connotation of victory and defeat. By employing the vocabulary of acquisition, Machiavelli highlights the original sense of the word conquest in medieval law. Etymologically, conquest can be traced back to the late Latin conquere, to acquire, from which feudal law derived conquestus, denoting the acquisition or purchase of an estate that is not inherited. Thus, Old English, Scottish, and Norman law distinguished between two kinds of acquisition: the acquisition of an estate through inheritance or through conquest, and the conquéreur was the first purchaser of an estate. So turning to the language of acquisition is a way to sidestep the jurisprudential and political debates that come with the later concept of conquest. Following this taxonomic distinction in chapter 1 between hereditary and conquered principalities, chapter 2 adds that hereditary or natural princes have less cause and less necessity to conquer, and henceforth they benefit from more love. The conqueror, by contrast, cannot count on such love. The surplus of love that a natural, i.e. a non-conquering prince, commands is his stock of legitimacy, a political resource which the new prince lacks and for which the new prince needs to find an equivalent. The problem faced by conquerors is thus not only how to acquire territory, but also how to create this equivalent, how to do this either by inducing love or fear, or by engendering a fictional memory that can serve as a substitute for the lack of lineage. A new prince must, in the language of chapter 24, appear ancient. By situating the problem of conquest in the context of establishing political legitimacy, Machiavelli formulates the political paradox faced by conquerors. Conquest is fundamentally antithetical to political stability. Conquest is an event that interrupts a political continuity. It suspends forms of political legitimacy based on custom and tradition, or indeed modes of legitimacy based on formal legal authority. Yet to the extent that a conqueror desires to hold on to the acquired spoils, conquest is predicated on a return to the state of stability and customary legitimacy that preceded it. The paradox of conquest is that a successful conquest is one that negates its own animating principle. In order to prevent future conquests, successful conquerors must declare their conquest to be the last one. They must find a way to represent their conquest without sanctioning the principle of violent change as a permissible way to transfer political authority. Machiavelli's solution to the paradox of conquest is found in this chapter. It is the admonition to princes that conquerors appear ancient. Conquest, in other words, is irreducible to brute force. It involves the production of appearances, of signs, and of symbols. Machiavelli would not have been surprised by recent research and scholarship, historical scholarship on the conquest of the New World, which found that which emphasizes the significance, the historical significance of symbolic aspects of conquests, the signs and ceremonial practices that accompanied conquests and that served both as a way of overwhelming the enemy but also as a way of generating authority deemed legitimate. Such symbolic gestures included erecting crosses, planting flags, emblems, and insignia, uttering certain ritualistic pronouncement, or measuring and assessing and mapping territory, and so on. Now, if the paradox of conquest can only be resolved within the register of the symbolic, then the prince to whom Machiavelli's recommendations are ostensibly directed must perhaps be interpreted not as the empirical addressee, but as a literary trope for conquest. After all, chapter 25 instructs us that the prince must conquer not only territory, but also Lady Fortuna, who, Machiavelli tells his readers, prefers audacity to prudence and must thus be won over by a combination of force and passions. By representing Fortune as a woman, Machiavelli situates the political problem of conquest squarely within the field of desire. The desire that animates conquest is not only sexually charged, but decisively gendered, operating within a phallocentric economy of male heterosexuality. In this economy, the objects of conquest are valorized through the possibility of exchange. This is an element of conquest that is most evident not in The Prince, but in Machiavelli's comedy, Mandragola, about an elaborate plot by a young Italian dandy to get Lucretia, a beautiful but married woman, into bed. In the play, Lucretia surrenders to her conqueror by accepting him and reciting these marriage vows, saying, "I take you then for lord, master, guide, you are my father, you are my defender." It is no coincidence that the language of conquest is applied both to the battlefield and the bedroom, and that the political terminology of mastery and lordship inserts itself into a comedy about seduction and wife-stealing. There is a continuity, Machiavelli seems to suggest, between the burning desire for Lucretia and the natural and ordinary desire for territorial conquest. But it's not just the effective dimension of sexual and political conquest that is homologous. Both require a mix of force and fraud, the two types of virtu embodied respectively by the lion and the fox, whom Machiavelli extols in chapter 18 of The Prince. Both also require a symbolic ratification of conquest, be it in the form of the parodied marriage vows uttered by Lucretia, or in the form of the surplus of love which the hereditary prince has and the new prince must create. If we take Machiavelli seriously, the figure of the sexual and romantic conquest cannot simply be dismissed as an innocent metaphor. Rather, it functions as a complex metonym, highlighting, on the one hand, the effective structure of political conquest, and on the other hand, the political dimensions of sexual conquest.